My name is Chris Hatley. I'm the CEO of the Academy of the Social Sciences in Australia. And it's our pleasure to be hosting this series of webinars on social sciences and space. We've had a fascinating series of discussions over the last 2 weeks, and this is our ninth and final webinar featuring some wonderful students from Canberra high schools, from Durham Island College and mental blank. Where are the rest of our students from? Sorry.
From Marici College.
Marici College, that's right. That's what I had in mind. I didn't want to make a mistake. Thank you, Catherine. Before we start, I'm going to play an acknowledgement of country video that we've prepared for this purpose. So just bear with me 1 minute.
Wherever you are across Australia,
we acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land.
The Darug peoples.
The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
The Gundungurra people of the Southern Highlands.
The Ngunnawal people of the Canberra region on whose country we are standing.
And all other peoples of this vast continent.
Their ongoing connection through custodianship of its land and waters.
Physical and spiritual.
Through culture, language and ceremony.
Where sovereignty was never ceded. We pay our respects to elders past, present and still to come.
Thanks, everyone. And for my part, I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land from which I'm joining the meeting, the Ngunnawal people in the Canberra region, and my respects to any Indigenous people who are with us here this morning as well. Just some housekeeping matters. Our participants joining this morning will be able to see all of our panellists, but we haven't got video or audio enabled. Please, though, feel free to use the chat function. You can share comments, reflections on the presentations this morning. If anyone would like to do so, perhaps you might want to just type in the name of the traditional owners of the region you're joining the meeting from this morning as well. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Professor Roy McLeod, who has convened this series of webinars for us. Professor McLeod is a Fellow of the Academy of the Social Sciences and a Fellow of the Academy of Humanities. Roy, over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, at least Sydney time, from the traditional lands of the Camaraga people in North Sydney. And welcome to the last of our 9 in the webinar series we've produced on Australia's future in space, an emerging agenda for the social sciences. My name, as Chris has said, is Roy McLeod. I'm a historian of science and an emeritus professor of history at Sydney University. And sometime Charles Lindbergh Professor in Aerospace History at Smithsonian's Air and Space Museum in Washington. This session is quite important, certainly important to me. It concludes a trajectory of encounters with the history of Australia's experience of making sense of space, and it has involved some 28 experts in the field, in a range of fields, in fact, which have a resonance with the subject. Over the last 3 weeks, our 9 moderators and their teams have accepted our very ambitious invitation to consider questions fundamental to the humanities and the social sciences in space, looking back to what may be captured from our indigenous knowledge and traditional systems through the Cold War, the early space age, to the many present challenges and opportunities facing those who see in space greater learning and understanding, and I hope benefits to mankind, and greater security and safety. It also must be said, there will be those who seek competitive advantage in the race among nations. We have drawn upon these experts who have shared their knowledge of culture and history, of health and heritage, of international law and diplomacy, of science and industry, and the practical possibilities of living in space as and when we get there, which of course we suspect will be very soon, perhaps even before the end of the decade. I myself have learned a great deal from these brief encounters, and I hope our viewers have as well. The experience has reminded me in many ways of events that have filled my own lifetime, which had been shaped in many ways by the consequences, first, of the launching of the Soviet Union's Sputnik, which more or less coincided with my 16th birthday in 1957, and which were to continue through the Kennedy generation, of which I was a part, with the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo missions, and thereafter through the Cold War and the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union, which in turn have helped shape much of my life and those of my generation. Now, such past reflections, of course, are an indulgence on my part, which I hope you'll let me share, as we turn to what I hope will be our future. As social scientists and humanists, we have a responsibility to ask fundamental questions. As throughout this series, we've tried to ask not only about the how, that's to say, how we get into space, but we will do what we will do as Australians when we get there, if we choose to be part of the space enterprise. Now, to this end, we're asking not only about the means, but about the ends, the interests that will be served, and the consequences of our decisions and our policies. Now, that responsibility extends not just to our politicians, but to ourselves, to our asking of others to help us, and to help us ask how we are going to fit into a global society in this range of questions, how we are to conduct ourselves and behave towards the new environments that we will encounter and impact. And how will this interaction, inevitably driven by a few, benefit us and the many in the world who are not directly involved in the space effort itself? Of course, this responsibility is not uniquely ours as Australians, but in many ways, as I think our series has demonstrated, Australians have the capability, as well as the blessings of location, geography, and resources, to play an important role. Not, of course, as a major power, but as an abiding source of influence and experience and entrepreneurship, and perhaps even idealism. Now, it's with these thoughts in mind that we've left to our participants this morning the task of looking to the future. We've looked to the next generation. They, perhaps more than many of us, have watched the increasing intensity of space-related activities taking place around the world, even during our COVID lockdown days these last 2 years, and have shared our fascination and our concern with the shape of things to come. To lead us in this discussion, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Catherine White of Merici College, Canberra, and Dr. Brad Tucker, the ANU in Mount Stromlo, who have been kind enough to invite 5 high school students from Merici and from Daramalan College to join us to reflect upon a range of questions which have been summarized in a way by our last panel yesterday, and I think have been put to Catherine and Brad to raise with her students. And so to go, I hope, to the heart of the key issues that underlie the entire series and that increasingly absorb us as humanists and social scientists. What role can Australia best play in the development of space research, exploration, and potential settlement? What are the risks and benefits to us, to mankind? What are the costs? What do we stand to gain? What will the experience teach us? These are reasonable questions to ask of any new project. But more importantly and searchingly, I think, how will our decisions help us work better together as citizens of Australia, but also internationally as inhabitants of the same planet and as partners in space? With this, I extend, as always, my warmest thanks to our host, Dr. Chris Heatherley and the Academy of the Social Sciences, the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Sydney University, and to my colleagues, Jose Torralba and Jacob Craig, and to my co-pilot in this exercise, Ms. Claire McFarland. So to lead our next generation into this new frontier, may I now welcome our two moderators, who will then introduce their own speakers. Catherine is a science and engineering teacher at Marici and a space enthusiast, as she describes herself. She studied physical chemistry at Sydney as a PhD in the subject. She's accredited as a highly accomplished teacher, as a program director of the Australian Junior Science Olympiad, and has led the design and implementation of a novel engineering elective at Marici that includes rocketry and other space-related topics. She's definitely the right stuff in this. Brad is an astrophysicist and a cosmologist. He received his degrees at the University of Notre Dame and a PhD in astrophysics from Mount Stromlo. He's leading programs there using the NASA's Kepler Space Telescope, which I guess is going to soon be replaced by the Webb telescope. And he's interested in understanding how and why stars blow up, as he puts it. He's also building a network of ultraviolet telescopes in the upper atmosphere and is interested in a new mission to capture and mine asteroids. He frequently talks to school groups and the general public and is in the course of writing his first book, which he tells me is called The Search for Life and Living in Space. So he's very much in the frame. May I now welcome Catherine to take the chair and to lead us into the frontier. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Roy. And good morning to you all from Canberra and Ngunnawal country. It's a real pleasure to be part of this webinar series. It has produced such an interesting variety of conversations. And having just come out of National Science Week, to now tie it up by reflecting on space from the point of view of younger Australians. The idea of space exploration is such an exciting one, and our ideas on space have so many influences. Space-themed popular culture like Star Wars and Star Trek, the ventures of NASA and Roscosmos and the ESA throughout the solar system, the pictures from the Hubble telescope, the popularizing of space education by Brian Cox and others, and now more recently, the live-streamed activities of private space companies. Over the last decade, we've also seen an increase in space-related activities in schools, partly due to the popularity of STEM courses. The intention of such courses, and both Marici and Darramurlan College have developed these as part of their teaching, is to show students the integrated nature of science and maths on the one hand and technology and engineering on the other, and thereby to help them transfer knowledge across subject boundaries and make them more effective problem solvers. Space themes are an excellent and engaging context for this. Today, we're going to focus on the imminent and important issue of human activities on the moon. The themes discussed in the previous sessions of this webinar series are relevant here. Environmental considerations, the significance of the moon in human culture, its potential as a source of knowledge, but also as a source of resources, and its importance as a stepping stone location for humans to explore further into the solar system. And there's also, as Roy has mentioned, the issue of Australia's specific role in what will inevitably become a worldwide focus. So with us, we have 5 Canberra students, Tristan Tierney and Kenneth Lee, who are both from Darramurlan College. And from my own school, Marici College, Ishita Gupta, Gabrielle Shoebridge, and Ariana Neerkan Safi. And to help us explore these ideas, Brad Tucker from Mount Stromlo, a fine scientist, and as Roy also said, an excellent science communicator. Brad, I'll hand over to you to get us started.
Yeah, thanks. And look, it's nice having seen the variety of talks that we've had, from learning some of the first science done on this continent 11,000 years ago, plus in astronomy, to what we're doing today. And I think if anything realizes is that the rate of progress is very fast. It's just a couple of months ago that we had billionaires going into space last year, landing on asteroids and returning to Earth. We have a raffle prize winner about to go into space next month. All of these things are changing in quick succession. And as Catherine said, there is a lot of focus on the moon, and that's what we're going to focus on today. what do we see ourselves doing? What do we see ourselves not doing? Why? And what do we want to happen on the moon? A lot of groups point to the moon as that next thing. And, as Roy said, back in the 60s, there was this race to the moon, and now it's a very different race. I don't think race is appropriate. It's not even a marathon because there is no finish. There is no point where you say, yep, we are cut off and we are done. And, one of the degrees I did as an undergraduate was philosophy. I did physics and philosophy together. And it's important to start thinking about it, as Roy touched on, not just what we are doing, why we are doing it. And this is a question that needs to be repeatedly asked to understand why we are doing it, because why we're doing it will guide us to what we want to do and how we achieve it. And that's actually what we're going to tackle today. Why, what, and how? It's a simple question with very complicated answers. And then that's actually what I wanted to ask the students right now. Why should we go to the moon and do all sorts of things in 50 years? And sometimes it's also too easy to think about why not. The list of why not may be longer than the list of why. And so perhaps, Kenneth, why or why not are we going to the moon? What is going to be the driving principle of our activity on the moon in the next 50 years that you see it? The ones who are going to have to deal with the mess.
Yeah, Brad, I think the clear thing that we need to define first in this is what we're not going to be trying to do by going to the moon. And I see that as one primary thing. When you think about going to the moon, a word that comes into a lot of people's minds is colonization, building colonies on the moon. And I think in historical context, we've seen the terminology of colonies being used quite negatively. It's often something that displaces a lot of people and has a very negative impact, usually from a larger power that's neglecting the inhabitants of a place that they're colonizing. And even though the moon doesn't really have inhabitants, not that we know of at least, then I think it's still essential that we set out that our goal here isn't for power. We're not trying to become more powerful, and we're not trying to increase humanity's dominance by going out into space. I think our goal here should mainly be research. It should be to go and see what we can do to improve our technology, which in turn helps people back on Earth, as opposed to the term colony, which normally refers a lot more to taking power and taking control of somewhere.
Yeah, look, drawing on those historical angles are important. I think sometimes we think of space as this new frontier we know nothing about, but it's just a different place, much like here on Earth, and we can draw on our lessons learned, positive and negative, for why or why not. And so perhaps, you touched on some of the reasons why not, and, started thinking about it's not a power grab necessarily, which is good. And maybe let's think about the research and the question and the ideas and interests that we have. So maybe some of the other students, what are some of those ideas? What are some of those things that are going to drive us to want to go explore the moon and be on it?
Well, there's always human curiosity. And already curiosity has led to many scientific inventions and discoveries, like going into the wildlife or conquering high mountains. And going on the moon will help us also further explore the solar system and give us a deeper understanding and a new perspective maybe on the formation of the Earth. And we could also find new materials that could lead to new technologies being made. And it could also encourage young people to participate more in STEM-relating activities in the future.
So you really start to see that some of these whys can have these very big goals that transcend necessarily a country or a political motive, which I think is a good thing. And I do think at heart that's what a lot of scientists want to accomplish today. But sometimes that may not be the path that we're led down. And there may be some details to work out. So, and I think it's interesting to think about some of these ideas of the moon being used to reflect back on Earth or our discovery of the solar system. And I think this is already starting to put us into a good framework of what we want to do. We want to make sure whatever we do benefits all humankind for the most part and doesn't benefit one or two or a dozen countries who use it for other political gains, let's say. So it's a very good point to start thinking about, I think, what we may look like in the 50s or in 50 years, which I don't think was necessarily the case in the 60s. I think the why was just, we have to, rather than why.
All right. So if I sort of take those ideas, what we're looking at is that our driving motivations are curiosity. So research and exploration and sort of those higher ideals. So what would you like this to look like? What, if we're thinking about the moon, what kind of activities, what structures, what ventures might this involve? Ariana?
Well, similar to what we have on Antarctica, we obviously have a lot of research stations to collect data about life on the moon and its surface, but we'd also have infrastructure to launch other objects from the moon into space, because it does take less energy to launch objects from the moon than it takes to launch objects from Earth. So that could help us with further space exploration and looking deeper into space beyond the moon. And we'd also have a lot of I like to call them embassies for different countries or organizations to have their own base so they can collaborate with each other, and it kind of facilitates a shared working space.
Nice. So one of the things that came up a couple of times in previous talks was the idea of potential space tourism, and that's obviously begun already with Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson. Do you think space tourism has a role in this, Tristan?
I think space tourism definitely has a role in future research on the moon and with that space exploration, because it provides a sense of letting more people in with that sense of research and curiosity and discovery, because they get to view space like no one has ever before. It would also provide many companies and countries with more money to fuel their space industry, which would be even better. So, yeah.
Yeah, right. Kenneth, you had some ideas about this?
Yeah, I was thinking that back a couple hundred years ago, 100 years ago, we saw the dawn of planes, and nowadays we see them everywhere. They're like something that the everyday public can afford. So I think a lot of us saw the controversy with the space tourism earlier this year, how seeing it as something for the like super rich people to go on. But maybe we might see it becoming more accessible to the general public, which might increase the money that we get to fund our space exploration, as well as generating interest. Because having those commercial airliners really improved the need to improve airliners. In the same way, maybe having this need to this generator of income and this requirement for space tourism maybe would encourage some better technologies in space.
Right. Gabby, you also had a perspective on this.
Yeah, look, I think space tourism provides an opportunity to raise awareness about space, similar to ecotourism. So if people have first-hand experience in space, they're more likely to care about its protection and looking after space as an environment. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So you've brought up the idea of funding, and research has historically been a government or a university funded activity, but increasingly researchers have to look to other sources of funding to help their work make progress. Industry is an obvious source of funding, and perhaps space tourism as well. So do you think we need other kinds of private industry? So the big why here is that we're going for research and exploration. But do you think we need profit-making industry to support these kinds of activities, perhaps both for resources and for funding? Ishi?
Yeah, I think we definitely do need their support, because if the government has to provide for all the funding, that would mean taxpayers would already have to pay a higher tax. And governments are also already burdened with a lot, and it may not be their priority to focus on something which may or may not be successful in the immediate future. And private industries they're also usually more flexible compared to government organizations.
All right. So if we're bringing industry in, does that introduce a tension between the profit motive of industry and our kind of overall ideal of the activities being directed towards research and exploration? Tristan?
Well, yes and no, because when the companies would be getting a profit out of this, or they might not, but there's still many of their workers, scientists, would be researching and exploring all these new discoveries. And as we've seen with SpaceX, they might be making a profit or they might not, I'm not sure, but they are still exploring and researching and finding new and more renewable ways to explore space and get to the moon. So space, there might be a tension between space industry profits and the motivation of research, but I think it's still key that we have the space industries.
Fair enough. And I agree, there's a lot of good research that has come out of companies, and the work, for instance, that SpaceX did recently to produce reusable boosters has been a big improvement on our ability to get things into space. But let me put a scenario to you. So imagine that we run into a situation, whether it's on the moon or, at some later stage in our exploration of the solar system, where a private company is determined to, say, mine resources in a particular area, but in that same area, researchers suspect that there might exist some important but currently undiscovered scientific evidence, say, even of life, former life, something like that. What are your thoughts on this, Gabby?
I think that such situations would probably be likely, and we need to be prepared for that kind of thing. I think that it's important that although industry is involved, the profit motivation needs to be mitigated, and that would probably look like a mediating third party, some kind of authority who turns us back to the why of research and makes sure that industry doesn't get out of hand with profit endeavors. I think we'd need some sort of body to mediate these kinds of things who would actually have the power to make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and I guess that's quite a good question, because if you have this why of not wanting any one group, and group in the loose sense, a company or a country to have power and control, dominate the market, steer the market in untoward ways. So how do you set up a group that oversees this? We heard earlier in these sessions about the role of law in space and the UN and COPUS. Is it the UN? Is it a country? Is it, what does it look like? And what does it need to look like? Because I think those are the two big questions really that are going to be the cornerstone of enforcing isn't the right word, but driving this vision is the regulatory checks and balances. So Kenneth, what do you think? Who ends up doing this? Is it a new body?
Yeah, I think since we live in an age where we have the most unity between countries and companies we've had like in all history, and that's mainly been through the UN. And we've had the World Health Organization and other companies, other UN agencies who have united countries to work together. And it served as kind of a decision maker for when those conflicts of interest do emerge. So something similar to that, maybe we could call it like the World Space Organization or something, something to regulate everything that happens and to make those decisions when there's conflicts of interest. Because I think it would be a real shame if we discovered evidence of life outside of Earth and then destroyed it for the sake of mining. That would be very unfortunate. So having an agency like the World Space Organization to make those decisions and make those calls is probably essential.
Yeah, look, I like the parallels to the World Health Organization, where it's kind of a separate entity that has a clear guideline instead of a bigger part. And so, but you also touched on something I think really important. There's going to be a lot of issues that need to be thought about, not just the ones that we even know about. So who has to be involved in this? Gabby, you touched on this earlier, but who do you think should be involved in something like this to make sure we get all of these views and say, yeah, the mining group doesn't overrun the astrobiology interests or something like that?
Yeah, look, I think that we'd want to engage as many people as possible from as many different backgrounds as possible. So like representatives from different countries, yes. And we've talked about involving governments and industries. Those are the big players. Scientists, I think, and academics would also play an important role in the organization. But we'd also want to include representatives with backgrounds in fields like medicine and ethics and diplomacy and environmental studies, all kinds of fields, because we don't know how far we'll go in space. We don't know what challenges we're going to face. So we need to set up this organization to be as diverse as possible so that it can deal with any challenge that space throws at us.
So it's not just who you're employed with, but also what you do, right?
Yeah.
Because I guess, someone doing mining from the NASA angle may be different from someone doing mining from a private company. And then even the scientists may be different. Ishi, did you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, something like the World Space Organization would also promote cooperation between the countries, and the countries would be able to share their unique insights from their local perspectives.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good point as well, right? We need to make sure that it's not just figuring out how to use it in space, but can we have benefits here on Earth? And we saw this with the 60s and 70s, the way space played in its role of uniting the US and the USSR/Russia, even at the height of animosity here on the ground. So if this group needs to have a diversity of people, both who they work for and what they do, and it has this ability to kind of transcend some of these earthly bounds. So how do they address and how do they keep people doing this? Like, why would someone sign up to this and actually agree it? Not being cynical old astronomer here. So what are the incentives for someone to participate in something like this? Gabby?
I think Ariana had some ideas about this.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Well, obviously, if we have the World Space Organization, they would need to have some kind of laws around mining and how people are going to operate on the moon. And we'd need to have some incentives, not just for why people are doing that, but how to make sure they're following the rules. So for example, we'd have a lot of data being collected from the moon. If people aren't following those laws that they've laid out for them, the data could not be shared to them or be closed off from them, or they wouldn't have access to the equipment around the world. They couldn't access those different satellites in different countries. That's kind of the incentive for them to follow the rules.
So if you kind of participate in this collective good, you get the benefits of the collective good. And if someone doesn't, they have to go off and do it by themselves, I guess. And I guess there's, again, parallels to how the WHO works, right? If you benefit to this, you can get benefits to some of the vaccine rolls out and that sort of stuff. So I guess you actually touched on something interesting then. We heard earlier in some of these sessions about how Australia is playing a role in communications and its geographical and technical expertise. So how does Australia fit into this, not just this body, but potentially this enforcement or encouragement for people to participate in this body? Kenneth?
Yeah, I think in space, especially as we go further into space, something that everyone needs to rely on is communication. And geography really kind of forces everyone to work together in some ways, because everyone's on different sides of the world. They need to communicate with their bases at all times. And that's where Australia really comes in really strongly. Most of us here are from Canberra. And so we actually have one of only 3 deep space network stations in the entire world, just down south from us right here. It's like the best thing in Canberra anyway. But it is, right?
Yeah. They're our neighbor up at Mount Stromlo, so I don't disagree.
Oh yeah, Mount Stromlo too. Don't forget that too. Yeah.
No, but we're neighbors. That's right. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a good point, right? We have this world-class facility in our back door.
Yeah, and I think Australia has always played such an important role in keeping communication with, and it's mainly been the US, but I think as we expand into space, it might be something for all members of the World Space Organization to use. And that's a really important role that Australia plays in keeping communication because of our geography.
I mean, I think that's a really great point that, you know, Australia is going to be in it almost whether we like it or not, because people are going to need us. And look, you actually point, we supported the US, but we support ESA. We've supported some of the CNSA missions. We supported the UAE's Hope mission to Mars earlier this year. So, you know, we're already slightly doing this role, even though there's not even a formal organization to tell us to do this role, which kind of starts to creep on. There's a little bit more of an impending nature of this that may need to come into play.
All right, so we've got this idea of the World Space Organization and the role that it could play in kind of promoting collaboration and mediating disputes, perhaps, in our ventures on the moon and beyond. When do we set up something like this?
Basically, as soon as possible. If we get countries going to the moon as individual endeavors and getting there first, they might start claiming the moon as their own or deciding that they want to make the rules, and because they were there first, they have more power. So as soon as possible, we should start getting this organization off the ground to get the rules in place, you know, start mediating already, get that collaboration going, so it's more of a universal endeavor.
Tristan, you had some ideas about this too?
Yeah, well, as we've seen with climate change, like many countries, they've already they took advantage of fossil fuels because they were they provided the countries with money and they were quite efficient. So if a crisis like this, so that when we started learning about climate change, it was very hard for those countries to want to join an action of zero emissions because they were already so deeply involved in fossil fuels in their industry and their economy. So if a crisis like this were to happen on the moon or in space, where the countries would have a big
a dispute of some kind?
Yeah, a dispute of some kind where they wouldn't want to get out of what they were already involved in. We need to make something like the WSO pretty quickly.
Yeah, Kenneth, do you want to build on those ideas?
Yeah, definitely. I think that that analogy with climate change, it's really strong because we really had, back in the day, we had a lot of people going to investing in fossil fuels. And then now that we figured out that it's not very good, it's really tricky to get people to convert. And even today, we're still struggling with that because we don't really have too much global unity. We have conferences. There's not actually that much, there's no organization that really gets countries to commit to net zero emissions as much. And that's mainly because everyone got there first, and forming some global unity was kind of an afterthought after everyone had already converted to fossil fuels. So in space, we have the opportunity here to really set up something like the World Space Organization early, which kind of sets the precedent. And so we don't get a situation where we have a country who gets there first and the country that gets there first decides the rules. And even more so in this situation, I think in climate change, it's something that everyone will be negatively affected by if that goes wrong. In space, we have competing interests, which are even more, which one country will gain a lot and one country might lose something. So in this situation, I think it's really important that we set something up like the World Space Organization as early as we can.
Yeah, those are great ideas. I have a question in the Q&A from Claire, who's said, so it's interesting that Australia is already providing support for so many other nations' endeavours in space. Should we be more ambitious about our own endeavours? And what would it take for you to want to start a space business?
Well, I would love it if we had an Australian space agency. That would be fantastic, I think. Do the others agree with me?
Well, so we do have a space agency, although it is in its infancy at the moment, just a couple of years old. But yes, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That would be good. Maybe one day that's the path that we'll take. I already think it's very good that Australia is taking a role in communications and helping other countries, but maybe it's time because New Zealand has its own space agency. It's a private company, and partially based on the US, but it's something. And Australia could have that path too, I think.
Do any of you sort of see space-related endeavours in your futures, or is this more theoretical for you?
Yeah, definitely, because of the amount of communication we are able to access with our geographical location in Australia. I think we should definitely take advantage of this and start to really boost our space agency up.
Excellent. Any of the rest of you?
Yeah, I think even if we don't pursue a career in space, it'll be part of our lives because that's where the Earth's moving to now. That's where humanity is moving to space. Yeah, and space exploration.
And even like if we don't end up doing something directly related to space, whatever job we choose, if it's in like a STEM field, we could like be collaborative people working with space in the space industry, I guess. Like in medicine, Gabby mentioned we want to have people from different fields in the World Space Organization, like medicine, environmental, diplomats. It doesn't really matter where you come from. We'd be like interacting with the space industry, I guess, in some way.
Still be participating in it in like some way or another.
Yeah. Brad, you wanted to say something about the question.
Yeah, and this is touching on, I guess, what Claire pointed out. Does Australia need to be more forceful? In the sense that I asked this, if a lot of countries are already working with us and depending on us, and we, i.e. you, see this need and this kind of World Space Organization, like, how do we do that? As in, does Australia just need to say, you already need us, this is the way it's going to work, just do it? And that's very naive to say it, but, does Australia need to use its footing a little bit more so that these ideals and needs that I think clearly quite a few of, not just you, but the community says needs to happen, make it happen? Because as you said, if you wait too long, like in lots of other cases, it may be too late.
Yeah, I think we've seen with the European Space Agency, they've been collaborating. All the countries in Europe have been working on a single organization that launches rockets and other things. In Australia, I think we already have a lot of innovation in space. A lot of our technologies and a lot of our thinking goes towards other countries and their space agencies, and we're developing satellites too. So I think possibly we could even see collaboration with other countries, more involved, not just communication, but in developing the technologies as well.
We have another question here from Penny Grist, who says there are lots of negative dystopian models in movies, TVs, games, and so on. Can the panelists think of an example of the positive vision that you've described, so something like the World Space Organization, being represented in popular culture, or do you need to start making a movie?
Yeah, there aren't many positive portrayals of humanity in space. Let's make a movie, guys.
Or is there a way we can use the negative portrayals, right? Is there a way that we can slightly use the negative portrayals to say, this could be an option if we don't do something?
A kind of warning.
Yeah, a kind of warning, because I think that's one of the things you're trying to come to a point to, is that there could be some issues, the things that we do want to happen, and we being, again, you who are going to be a bigger part of this, how do we get people to see these visions?
Yeah, perhaps the fact that there's a lot of media that has countries competing and fighting each other in space kind of tells us that having a bit of unity early is probably a good idea to avoid a future like that.
Yeah, I agree. Look, thank you, all five of you. There's some awesome ideas there. Thinking about the fact that it is your generation and not ours that is going to kind of make this venture come to fruition. I mean, our generation is going to get it started, but you will kind of take what is built and move it further. Could I ask each of you to sum up your thoughts with a final comment, maybe an appeal to those who currently have the decision-making power? What do you want to see happen?
Well, I think we need to think before we act in terms of space exploration and going to the moon. And also, if we want to really get the best out of space exploration, we really need to collaborate well. and that's how we will achieve our goals.
Excellent. Ishi?
Yeah, I think going to the moon will solve a lot of our current problems, like climate change, like we discussed, and it will help us evolve and create new technologies. And it will also continue to promote more interest in STEM-related jobs for our generation.
Lovely. Gabby?
Yeah, I think we need to remember that it isn't just about the moon. It's about humanity in space and space exploration. And the way that we approach the moon now, I think it sets precedent for space exploration into the future. And we have a choice whether that's going to be a precedent of competition and power struggles, or a precedent of communication and collaboration and growth. And I think it's clear which one we should strive for.
That's an excellent thought. Ariana?
I think the most important thing is that idea of the now, the imperative, that we should get it going now so we can, get that exploration going, get the data, investigate new things, and obviously start the World Space Organization or some kind of body so we can get the collaboration going as well.
Brilliant. And Kenneth?
Well, I think we're sitting here in a position where we can do this right, or we can have it go catastrophically wrong. And so because of that, I think thinking about our decisions, we can move forward. And if we do it right, if we have a bit of unity, if we don't have too much conflict between different parties, then we might see something incredible emerging in the near future that inspires generations to come as we continue on our path towards space.
Fantastic. Thank you, all of you. It's been a really interesting conversation today, and we have touched on a whole, as Brad said at the beginning, there's this whole sort of process of linked ideas that we have to work through in such a big and complicated venture as this. And your ideas are valuable, and they're also, I love their positivity and the idealism of them. We need that kind of thinking to, as you all said, to make sure that we start off on the right foot from here on. Brad, did you want to summarize?
I think, as you said, this is something that we're going to have to deal with. I think, as one of you said, whether we like it or not, it's part of our world. And we do have to deal with it. And I think what Catherine said is right. It's the positivity of focusing. And I think there's always a lot of ways to think doom and gloom in the world and in space, but we can turn it positive. And I think we've seen what can happen when things are positive done in space. We can see the benefits, and you're crafting the right framework. And, I do think that the more these discussions happen, the more outside just the space circle sitting in a space agency or a university or company have, the better humanity will be, because it will craft and formulate what we want as a world space to be. Because, as you said, I think, Gabby, it's not just the moon. There's lots of other places that are going to be part of our lives, and we have to think about it properly.
Well, Roy, I'll pass back to you at this point.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, all of you, for your positivity, particularly at this time when we need that. Just a few observations that you might want to take into account as you go forward. You must follow closely the work of NASA, which of course is very much interested in all of these subjects and is the governing body, if you like, in much of the research and taking on board much of the research agenda that is undertaken in Australia. We have a very close relationship with the United States, and there is an interesting question as to whether an independent Australian space effort can exist independently of the United States. There is also the fact that we have a space agency, and if you haven't read into the work of the space agency, you should. Now, this may also say something about the space agency and the degree to which it has made itself as well known as it should in the 2 years and a bit that it's been in existence. I know the space agency is thinking of opening a branch office, or at least embassy, or perhaps even moving to Canberra, in which case you will see it down the street. But it's certainly something that you should take into account. There is work underway although I don't think that they're as ambitious or as far-sighted in some respects as you have been already this morning. I would also say, though, it's very important to you to take into account the history of all this effort. Space has been a defense realm. We've been principally interested in security. And the space race wasn't just a race, it was in the national interest of the United States and the Soviet Union. Primacy in space has everything to do with control of earthly affairs as well. She who controls the moon very largely controls the earth. And so there are defense implications, and it's by no means an accident that we now have emerging in the Defense Department a space division. A 2-star officer will be in charge of that very soon. And the big money is in defense. So take this into account, please, in your thinking. It is not just a civil industry exercise. It will be concerned with Australia's defense and security interests as well. Also, I think perhaps you want to give a little bit more attention to the branch of the division of your World Space Organization that will police the rules and regulations or customary protocols that you have in mind. I mean, think of Star Trek, if you know further, all right? You will have to have a policing power. It's been hard enough for us to come to terms in earthly matters to think of the UN as having a police force to send in on an emergency basis. We haven't been able to get that together. We've relied upon different countries to send police forces in Africa, for example, to the blue helmets, as they're called, and that hasn't worked entirely to everybody's satisfaction, to say the least. So think about the wider implications, the longer-term implications of such organizations. It's good, it's all very fine, setting up rules and regulations, but then how do you police them? How do you enforce them? So, I mean, all of these are just thoughts for you to think about, to take on board, and to refine your plan and your process. Remember also that DFAT has a space desk. So if you want to impress upon anybody in Canberra the need to proceed in this direction, ring your friendly DFAT space desk and to take up the story there. And in fact, I think that you may have read or heard of Jared Oakes. He spoke to us in a previous session. He is concerned, of course, with the space Artemis Accords and the various agreements that are under consideration now internationally. That's his desk. He's a lawyer, but there is more room for space, so to speak, in DFAT's organization, I think, and I think that is itself a kind of tension, a creative tension, as between defense and foreign affairs. So you're ideally situated in Canberra, where you are. You have access to government in a way that the rest of Australia hasn't. You see in the Canberra Times, you see in the conversation of your friends and parents, a lot of things that are more immediate to you than we have access to. So carry on with these wonderful ideas and proposals. I think you're on very, very important lines of action and participation. But just be conscious of the fact that there are a number of constraints and as well as opportunities ahead of you. That's all I would add, but bravo to all of you for actually giving time and thinking. The one selfish thing I would suggest is when you say STEM, please think of STEAM.
Yes, of course.
STEAM, including the arts and the humanities, broadly speaking.
That's a good point, Roy. Actually, I mean, the purpose of this whole series of webinars, as well, your purpose was to bring the arts into this kind of traditionally STEM field. So yeah, I apologize for that.
Well, I'm sure STEM is the first thing to think about. Of course, we all have to know science. I did science first before I turned to history, and that's very important. But do remember the wider context as well. Well, I think we've come very nearly to the end of our time, and bravo to all of you for being so timely. Thank you so much. I hope we can keep in touch. It's been a wonderful group. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Brad. Are you still there? Is Brad still there?
Thanks.
Thank you. I hope to meet up with you sometime soon, if ever we're allowed to travel again.
Getting to space may be easier at this rate.
We'll meet on the moon, shall we?
That's right.
All right. All right. Thank you. And let me pass the baton to Chris.
Thank you, Roy, and thanks, Catherine and Brad, and thanks to all of our panelists today. That was a really fascinating discussion. I was in and out a little bit with small children who are particularly interested in Star Wars at the moment. That's as far as their space interests go, but you know, they're very much on the trajectory where they'll be in a position like you are in a few years' time, where they're thinking seriously about, you know, their futures and the future of our society extending beyond our planetary borders, and you know, how we evolve, how we manage in the ways that you've outlined today. So thank you. Thanks to our attendees today. As we said, this session will be recorded and it'll be up on the Academy's website in a week or two. So please do come back to some of this discussion, and we hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation that continues. So on behalf of the Academy of the Social Sciences in Australia, thanks once again, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.